Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. One of the things that's important about this show is that while we spend a lot of time talking about politics and the political climate, one of the other things that we've tried to do since day one is bring attention to issues and things that might otherwise not get as much attention as we, in our completely biased perspective, believe that they should. We're going to try to return to that a little bit more over the coming weeks and months, and we're going to start with today. Today, we are going to be speaking with Julian Fletcher, who's the program coordinator for the Tourette OCD Alberta network. I hope I got that all right. Julian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Very welcome. Very pleased to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Excellent. So before we get into the work that the Tourette OCD Alberta network's doing, would you be so kind as to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got involved with the organization? I think that might maybe be some Tennessee I'm hearing in your voice there.
Absolutely. Southern Tennessee accent. You got it. Everyone picks up on that.
I don't want to brag, but I got an ear for these things.
Okay, obviously you can hear that I am English. I'm from the United Kingdom. Yep, I'm the program coordinator of the Tourette OCD Alberta network. My background is education. I've been a teacher or involved in education for most of the last 30 years. And I was a high school teacher of English literature, not in Canada, but in my native England. Also, I taught in Australia. I've spent 10 years living in Italy, where I also taught English, and a little bit of time in Greece. So I kind of traveled around a little bit. Now, I've always been deeply interested in Tourette syndrome and OCD as to how they impacted students in my classroom. I was interested in the fact that there were lots that I didn't know, and I could understand things were going on. And that many years later led me to a conversation with someone who asked me to set up or be part of the setup of an organization here when I came to Canada with my family around about 4 or 5 years ago, to begin to think about this organization and to become the front of it, the program coordinator. So I was asked to coordinate this organization because I did have an educational background. And what we primarily do is raise awareness and understanding of tic disorders, Tourette syndrome. We'll say a little bit more about that, no doubt, later. OCD and comorbidities, those conditions and disorders that are associated with them. So part of that is that I do outreach in schools, or an outreach to anyone who will actually respond and listen to the message that will enable us to find those avenues to raise awareness. And that's how I came to be part of this organization. That's the kind of field we're in now, and we're trying to broaden our reach and broaden our audience, because it really is an unknown area of the neurodevelopment of young children.
So let's start with some definitions. I just want to be really clear for our audience as well. You're the program coordinator, you're an educator, and that's the viewpoint that you're going to be speaking from today, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I make it clear when I have these conversations, I'm interviewed in such a manner that I'm not a clinician. My knowledge about Tourette's and OCD is not clinical knowledge. I don't have a medical degree, but then that's not my remit. So I speak from an educator, and I speak from the point of view of someone who tries to educate, tries to provide psychoeducation to families and teachers. So my understanding is not a medical one. I'm not a clinician. I think it's really important to underline that.
Would it be fair to say, like, in the same sense that a biology teacher at a high school isn't a biologist, or a math teacher isn't necessarily a mathematician, that's kind of the type of conversation that we're going to have today?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, be more pointed about, in the sense that someone will ask me perhaps a question about medication. What's the most efficacious medication? I can read that from a screen, but I don't understand that in terms of how it affects the body. So it's just an area I don't go to, and generally I don't need to. I do speak about medications in a very general sense, but yeah, there just are just clear areas that I can't and wouldn't go into.
Perfect. All right. So let's get into it. What is Tourette's?
Okay, so Tourette syndrome is a tic disorder. And a tic disorder is when someone has tics. Now, a tic is a sudden and repeated vocal movement. And that's exactly what it is. Now, one of the problems with defining that is that lots of the general public has an understanding of what Tourette syndrome is. And, tic disorders themselves are that and much wider than that. So a tic can be a motor tic or a vocal tic. And it can be simple and it can be complex. So a motor tic could be, in its simple form, could be a facial grimace, it could be a movement of the mouth, it could be eye movement, it could be a neck jerk. They're what's termed as sort of simple motor tics. And then as tics advance, they can become quite complex and they can affect more than just one muscle group. So that we might get complex arm movements, complex body movements, and they look much more purposeful. But in essence, motor tics are movements of the body which are sudden and repeated. And that's no different in terms of vocal tics. Vocal tics, so any sound that you make can become a tic. Sometimes they become quite loud, but again, some are quite simple, perhaps like a throat clearing, and perhaps a kind of gurgling. Any sound that the body can make can become a tic. So they can become quite complex as well. So they can become like complex phrases, complex words. And again, they're sudden and they're repeated. And certainly with vocal tics, they seem more purposeful. They seem to have more meaning because they're words that we can actually understand. But in essence, they are tics, and they are as purposeless and meaningless as motor tics too.
So I want to touch on something that I think you might have alluded to, the public perception, and certainly we've seen this in movies and television shows and cartoons and of Tourette's, is that it is a propensity to yell profanity. And to my understanding, from based on what you just said there, that is a potential manifestation of Tourette's, but it's not the only manifestation. Am I getting that right?
No, absolutely. So that's called coprolalia, but that, or the swearing tic as it's known, that only affects 10% of people who have Tourette syndrome. Okay. Now, just let me clarify what Tourette syndrome is before I carry on there. So Tourette syndrome, to have the diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, a person, should have 2 motor tics and 1 vocal tic for longer than 1 year. At that point, they were diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. Okay, so it's very rare that one of those vocal tics is actually coprolalia or the swearing tic. Yeah, as I said, it affects less than 10%, and it's as low as 7% in children. But that is the public perception, that people shout and scream and blurt out obscenities. It does happen, but it's actually quite rare.
Do you think that public perception of that being the presentation of Tourette's is harmful?
I think it is harmful. It's certainly harmful to the person that has that tic, because in essence, it is no different to any other tic. Therefore, people's response to it is perhaps alarmist. And that's why our organization exists. Our organization exists to ultimately convey the idea that tics should be ignored, no matter what tic they are. And it is difficult to ignore an obscenity. A profanity, depending on the context as well. In most contexts, it can be insulting. But part of my job is to raise awareness that we have to ignore it, that it's meaningless. And once we understand that, it is possible to lessen the impact of that kind of language in any given situation. But again, it's about education, it's about understanding, and that goes right across the board, whether it be in the classroom, or in outside, or wherever people with tics. Many people are going about living their lives, but it can certainly be a hindrance, of course.
Okay. I just want to also sort of touch on another piece there before we go on to talk about the OCD piece. How much control, like, is it a spectrum? How much control people have over these tics from, like, if they really, really try hard, they might be able to mask them to some degree, or is there like to all the way to there's no control whatsoever? Does it vary from person to person?
It can vary, of course. Yeah, it does vary from person to person, and it's also much more difficult for children. And they can be taught to manage. When I say they, I mean people who are affected by Tourette syndrome can be taught to manage their tics with cognitive behavioral therapy. But it's quite difficult, obviously, when you're a young child, because I mean, in that sense, management requires a kind of cognizance of what we call the premonitory urge. Before someone tics, they generally get a sensation in their body. It might be a tension, it might be an itch, it just might be a discomfort, and that's involuntary. They know that they're going to tic, but the actual response to that is voluntary. That's why the tic. That's why tics are often called semi-voluntary. So part of that control in cognitive behavioral therapy is about understanding being aware of when they have that tension in the body and then resisting that. It's called habit reversal therapy. And over time, that time between feeling that urge and actually doing the tic can be prolonged. So that's a kind of management strategy. But in certain situations like the schoolroom, it's quite common for young people, students, to suppress their tics. Suppression is possible, but it takes a gargantuan effort. So if you're a child in a classroom, you're concentrating what your teacher is disseminating and teaching, and you're just concerned about your tic, and you are managing to suppress it. The upshot is a child who's uneasy, who's distracted. So it's not an easy task at all, and it means that child then goes home and goes out of the classroom and will often have a heightened or increased tic severity because of that suppression. So it is possible, but it can be difficult depending on the scenario.
It kind of sounds like what you're saying is like saying to a kid who's trying to manage or navigate, I'm not sure what the right terminology is here, a tic disorder like Tourette's, saying to them, just stop it, might be equatable to saying to them, I'd like you to push this car down the street. With enough effort, they can probably do it, but it's going to take up all of their focus and energy. Is that a fair metaphor?
Absolutely, it's an interesting metaphor, but that is what I would say. And that's the nub of the gist. When I go, one of the things I do is that I go into schools and I do outreach. I do an in-service presentation. I was doing it earlier this week, and implicit and explicit in what I'm presenting is we need to ignore tics. We need to tolerate them. So if you are again in a classroom, and I use that example a lot because obviously that's where young people, students, find themselves a lot of the time and where issues arise. And if a teacher says benignly, can you stop that? You may as well say, can you tic more? Because you just create stressors and anxiety levels raise, and they will tic even more. Tic severity and frequency will no doubt increase. So that's what we need to do in society, wherever we are. We have to learn to tolerate tics and ignore them. And certainly in classrooms, that's my message to teachers. And many of them do understand that. But it's difficult in a classroom scenario when you do have other comorbidities like perhaps just disruptive behavior, etc.
Okay, let's talk about those comorbidities for a sec. So, when a lot of people hear comorbidities, thanks to COVID, they assume that we're talking about other things that are going to kill a person. That's not what it means, though.
No, it's not. No, absolutely not. No, it's an associated condition or disorder that comes along with tics or Tourette syndrome. So the most common comorbidity with tics is actually ADHD and OCD. So 50% of young people that we see at the Tourette syndrome clinic, and that's where I spend a lot of my time, at least once a week, will have ADHD. And of course, that's not going to kill them at all. But it often the ADHD and the symptoms of it, like impulsivity, the inability to concentrate and be attentive, is more impairing and bothersome than the actual tic or tics. So it is often the comorbidity has greater impact on their lives. But no, we shouldn't let the language scare us at all. It's just an associated condition with the tic disorder.
So you say that common comorbidities are ADHD and OCD. It's included in the name of your organization, so I feel like we have to talk about it. There's a lot of misconceptions about it as well. So what is OCD?
Okay, so OCD, as it says, is obsessive compulsive disorder. And there are two elements to it, two components. One is obsessions and one is compulsions. And someone who has OCD, has the disorder, will often have overwhelming urges and images and thoughts in their mind, and they're repeated and they're uncontrollable. And it's not anything that they can do much about. They're conscious of it, but it's something that will be highly distracting for them and will worry them quite a lot. But they are conscious that these thoughts are actually irrational. Now, the compulsive part of it are the rituals that they do to neutralize the anxiety caused by the obsessions. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let me say that someone may have an obsession with perhaps their house is going to catch on fire, and if they and it's going to kill their parents or their mum. So what they might do, they might engage in a ritual, say perhaps flicking a light switch or putting their blocks in a certain order, so that they can counteract that thought, that outcome. So there's a clear relationship between the obsessions and the compulsions. And the compulsions, as I said, are rituals which neutralize the anxiety, the overwhelming thoughts that they're having. But it's like it only does it temporarily. So they have that neutralization, and then they have these thoughts again, and they go back to the thing that helped them overcome it, which was the compulsion, the ritual. And they can't come out of that easily. And again, the only way to do that, and I'm speaking very generally about OCD, just for the purposes of what we're doing today, the only way to come to terms with that in a realistic process is through something like, again, CBT and medications.
Okay. So now I want to just be sort of clear as well. I'm sure that there's a specific set of diagnostic criteria for determining that somebody has OCD, much like you talked about with they have to have 2 physical tics, 1 verbal tic. There is, again, a public perception that OCD is I have to flick the light switch 5 times before I leave the house kind of thing. Does it exist on a spectrum in 2 parts? Does it exist on a spectrum as well? And what does the diagnostic criteria look like, if you're able to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak about it in terms that I think are practical and we'll all understand, because to an extent, we all have obsessive compulsive symptoms. I do. I check my door every night before going to bed, and then I'll come back downstairs to get a drink of water and I'll check it again, and I'll check that the gas is off. And then when I come home from work, I'll wash my hands maybe twice. But it ends there. It dissipates. It goes away. I don't think about it again. Someone with who has those symptoms and more than that would do that repeatedly. So, for example, and I'm getting to answer your question, we will get young people in the clinic who will, during the COVID pandemic, we had to wash our hands repeatedly for 20 times, which was great. But they young people would do this for hours on end, literally hours on end. And it's when OCD gets in the way that it becomes a medical problem that we need to seek. We need to seek advice from a doctor. So it's and I've heard OCD clinicians talk about getting in the way when it's truly bothersome, and sometimes they measure it by, I've heard say, when more than an hour a day is invested in a ritual. And I've met young people who would do their ritual for 4 hours, 3 hours. It's not unheard of, whatever that ritual is, whether it's ordering, symmetry, checking, again, relating it to the classroom. Some young people with OCD have an issue with certain numbers they feel uncomfortable with them, say often 3 or 7, and they will need to walk in the classroom 3 times until they feel better. So yeah, it's just measuring how impactful and bothersome the symptoms are in someone's life before they become a disorder. That's why, and you hear a lot of it recently in public discourse, that people get upset of, oh, I'm a bit OCD, which is, I think, it's been a bit pedantic, but I understand it because it's not a disorder. We all have those symptoms to an extent, but we go about our daily lives, they dissipate, we forget about it. In people with OCD, that is certainly not the case. A child in the classroom may be worrying about the order of their toys at home when they're not at home, and then thinking, God, some disaster will happen, something will befall my family if they're out of order. So that's clearly a disorder.
Yeah, maybe people should just say I'm a bit OC, but then that would probably just lead to everybody referencing bad 90s shows. So maybe not. I guess the two other big areas that I wanted to touch on with you today are, we're talking about kids a lot. I presume, and I'm hoping that you can clarify this for me, this is something that tends to appear more in kids, teenagers, than manifesting suddenly in adults, both tic disorders, Tourette's, and OCD.
I couldn't answer to that how if it occurs more in adults. It does occur in adults because one thing I do, as I said once, I do go. I take part in the Tourette syndrome clinic as in my role as program coordinator, and I speak to parents on a weekly basis. But we do also have an adult clinic, so indirectly, I know what goes on there, and there are adults who do get tic disorders in later life. But the difference in terms of, prevalence rates, I wouldn't know. But in terms of children, it is actually 1 in 100, which makes it quite a common disorder.
So let's talk about the kids and the parents piece. For a parent who is wondering, not sure, or a kid who maybe has some concerns about tic disorders or Tourette's, what are the things that you want them to hear?
Do you mean before I see them, or they're at home and they've got?
Well, I'm at home and I'm watching my kid and they're doing this stuff and I don't really understand it. What should I be doing? What do the pathways look like? Like it's for parents, these sorts of things can be profoundly intimidating. And for a parent who's starting to go, is this a thing or not? How should they pursue that, I guess, is my question.
Well, yeah, there are different ways of looking at that, because the first port of call is kind of psychoeducation is education. There's a lot of information out there, but it is disparate, it is atomized and fragmented. So that's quite difficult. Parents, it is overwhelming and intimidating. Parents have to negotiate that as well. But should a parent have those questions, and they don't know about us, is that they should go to their family practitioner, their family doctor, and speak with them, because and that's another issue. Sometimes not everyone knows that there is a Tourette's clinic in Calgary, and that's one of the reasons why our organization exists. But they can get a referral through their family doctor to either a psychiatrist who's working professionally where they live, or if they're in Alberta, they can get a referral through their family doctor to our clinic. Of course, the doctor will not confirm or will have an idea whether they have tics or not, and then on that basis make that referral. But sometimes, parents will find us online and they'll write to me and they'll say, well, I've spoken to my doctor and they didn't give me that pathway. That pathway was not available to me. What should I do? And then I'll give them a referral fax number and say, this is the clinic. This is the fax number. Please speak to your doctor and make that referral. But there are kind of 2 points to that. Is one about finding information, but again, it has to be kind of evidence-based information. That's obviously difficult for all parents. And the other part is getting the referral, getting a response from a doctor.
Do you see, anecdotally of course, but do you see parents concerned about stigma. I mean, again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, we talked about how the public perception of Tourette's is the profanity and all of that. And as you've said, it's a very low incidence of that actually inside of the presentation of Tourette's. Do you see parents who are concerned about, does this mean my kid is somehow less? And what would you say to a parent that's potentially worried about something like that?
I don't see it in stark terms like that. I do see worried parents, and of course they're worried about the stigma. And I have to say, generally, when I pose those questions about the sort of social difficulties they may be having, educational difficulties they're having with friends at school, I think generally they are positive. But there are quite a lot that are having a difficult, uncomfortable time at school and with their social groups. And of course, the genesis of that's predicated on that worry that this is stigmatizing, and how can we normalize this? I think that's at the heart of what parents are expressing when they speak to me, but obviously they don't express it in those terms, because often I meet them at the beginning of the diagnosis, and they'll have some experience of what it's like in school, and I can speak to that experience if it has been negative. But part of what I do is telling them about psychoeducation, because it's fundamental to family well-being. Informing yourself as to what tics are, what the natural history will be, what will be the impact on social and academic functioning. That's absolutely fundamental to ultimately reducing those stresses at home and in school. So I think that's your question. That is a concern with most parents. It wouldn't be, but I'm trying to reduce that concern, but of course it is a pervasive worry.
I mean, we've talked a lot today about educators and the role of your organization. You said this earlier, as you go into schools, you educate people. For any of the teachers that are listening to this episode or watching this episode, what are the big points that you want teachers to hear?
The first one is, in the general sense, is if you know someone has tics, don't speak to them. Don't
about the tick. Like, I assume you don't mean shun them.
No, of course, not at all. Don't shun them at all, but shun their tics. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been a teacher. I found it most uplifting job that anyone could ever have. I enjoyed it much, but it was very stressful. My day was very busy. And someone like me comes along and says, "Will you listen to me for an hour?" And I know that's quite difficult in a teaching calendar. I get that, but that's what I'm always endeavouring to do, and it is quite difficult. But I just want teachers to just kind of be aware of what tics are and the impact that they and the comorbidities associated with them can have on the child in the classroom. And sometimes it's just that awareness, it's just that kind of alleviating that kind of misunderstanding that can make a difference to the child in the classroom. Because one of the things, if I can just speak to it for a moment, one of the things that I do in the presentation is an empathy exercise. I did it twice this week. And I get so much enjoyment out of doing it, because I don't have to sort of disseminate information. We do an activity where I get my audience, and I do this with students as well, but this week I did it with teachers, and when I speak to them, I get them to copy down a poem, but I give them a tic symptom. I give them where as they're copying down the poem, when I clap, they have to raise their hand in the air, and then I give them an OCD symptom. They have a discomfort with the number 3, and they have to cross out every third word with 3 lines, then write it above. And then I give them ADHD. I buzz, and when I buzz, they have to look upwards. And we do that 3 separate occasions. They try to copy down the poem, and of course, it becomes quite difficult for them. But what is great about it is the upshot is I just asked them. I just set it open. I said, "Tell me what you feel. What happened? What was going through your mind?" And they get right to the heart of what it's like to be a struggling student. And certainly teachers, they'll instantly say, they'll say, "I felt frustrated, I felt angry," and they actually feel it. That's why it's an empathetic exercise. But they'll say, "I just don't know why I was doing this exercise, because I couldn't complete it. I couldn't finish it. I had no idea what the purpose of my doing this was." And I want teachers to feel what it's like to be a struggling child in the classroom. And I think just with that piece of information, I don't want to encumber them with lots of additional strategies, even though I do talk about them in a general sense, but it's that awareness piece that's important. Of course, the awareness of not speaking to the tics, but certainly speaking to the child.
Awesome. If people want to know more, about Tourette's, if they want to know more about OCD, if they want to know more about the Tourette OCD Alberta network, where do they go?
They come to me. They come to our website. Our organization is called the Tourette OCD Alberta Network. Put a .ca on the end of that. That's our vanity URL, and you will find us immediately. And there is a whole gamut of information on there that I have discussed and spoken about today. My contact details on there. You can reach out to me, and it is my job to try and help you in any way I can. As I said, I'm not a clinician, but I'm surrounded by clinicians, and I can help them. I can be the go-between to get that information if I need, and or I can find a resource, or I can just, as I often do, I'll just have a chat with a parent who's worried and say, look, I'm in this situation, my child is doing this, what does this mean? And I can just have a chat with them and just put them at their ease. And I like to respond as quickly as I can, because it's really important to get a quick response. That's where I'm kind of sitting here waiting for. When I first started this job, I just thought, I'd be kind of snowed under with doing school presentations. Of course, it's a little bit more difficult than that. I know you're talking about parents, but I also just want to say to teachers that are listening that if you feel that you could benefit from my coming to your school, please do reach out to me. And if it takes 2 or 3 months to arrange, or we have to put it into a PD day at the end of the year or the beginning of next year, we can wait, and we can have an ongoing discussion, or I can do whatever works for you.
Just out of curiosity, and I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. Have you ever had any conversations with the Alberta Teachers Association?
I have actually. I had a meeting with the president about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Jason Schilling, I believe, and that was great. But it was just getting to him. It's always getting to the right person, which is difficult. And I've subsequently found that other people that work in the mental health field had these difficulties too, because I thought maybe it was me, maybe with my deep South American accent, I just don't understand what it's like in this part of the world. But it's not that. It's just to do with the vagaries of the system. So speaking to Jason enabled me to do or to present at the Edmonton Teachers PD Day, which was online on Monday, and I did 2 presentations to a total of 50 teachers, which was great. So I certainly have pursued that line of inquiry, and it was very successful. And I have others going, but they're just kind of slow burners. It just takes a little while.
Is there a general email? So if there are any teachers, which I know there are, listening or watching to this, is there a general email that they can fire off to you so that they can get that process?
My email, which is julian.fletcher@ucalgary.ca.
We'll
And
even
that's
put
Julian
that.
with an A. Sorry?
We'll even put that on the screen.
Please do. Yes. So you can write to me directly, and that can be the starting point for whatever it needs to be in terms of how I can help you.
Awesome. Open mic for you, sir. Anything else you want to say? Anything else you want people to hear before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I suppose ultimately one thing I did miss out is what we're trying to do in terms of why we exist as an organization, is that we are, as an organization, trying to enable families and patients that are affected by Tourette syndrome and OCD to have treatment closer to home, closer to their communities. And we do a lot of continuing professional development for healthcare providers, and we're incredibly successful at that. And we've had over 500 mental health therapists actually sign up to our webinars. So that is ultimately our goal. There's a specialty clinic in Calgary, and Alberta is a huge province, but it has 4 million people. So there's a kind of service delivery gap. There's an unevenness. So that's part of what we're trying to do overall, is to ensure that people don't have to come to Calgary, that there are trained therapists close to their community from whom they can get treatment. yeah, that's I've probably said all of what I wanted to.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad you were able to say everything that you wanted to. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I really do appreciate it, and I hope that you're able to get back to Southern Tennessee sometime. I hear the fall there is delightful.
And the whiskey. Don't forget the whiskey.
There you
go. Thank you, Nate. Thank you for this opportunity. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love it if you swung by our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signed up for a small monthly sponsorship of the work that we're trying to do here. It is because of the support that we receive from our Patreon sponsors that we're able to continually up our game, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I want to throw a big thank you out to them, and you can go ahead and visit that website and join and support us as well, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening and being part of these important conversations. And we will see you next time on The Breakdown.